Finance and Public Administration Committee. Ross Greer sends his apologies and will join us when he can. The first item on our agenda is to take evidence from two panels of witnesses on the cost effectiveness of Scottish public inquiries, looking specifically at international examples and comparisons. For the first panel, I'm delighted to say that we are joined remotely by Professor Carl Dahlström, Professor of Political Science at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, and Dr. Scott Prasser, Public Policy Consultant and Commentator, Australia. I'd like to welcome you both to the meeting and thank you for taking the time to speak to the committee about your experience and knowledge of public inquiries in your jurisdictions. And we will move straight to questions. So, Professor Dahlström, good morning to you. I note in your submission, you say that public inquiries are initiated by the Swedish Cabinet by issuing a Commission directive. This outlines inquiries' terms of reference, specifies the type of inquiry to be held, identifies the issue to be investigated and sets a closing date. Now, are these generally stuck to?
So let me first say thank you very much for having me here. And maybe we should note that the report is written by Kira Pronin, who is a PhD also. But going on to your question, so the directives are generally, they generally stick to the directives. The normal procedure is to have a quite lengthy directive. Some criticism have been about these directives being more and more precise, so therefore framing the inquiry more and more. But they can be written in an open or a more specific way. But they are kept to, and the Cabinet can also issue new directives if they feel that the inquiry needs further directions.
Okay, thank you for that. Because one of the issues that we have, and I'll go into it a wee bit further soon, is the issue that there doesn't seem to be any kind of cost controls or time limits on the inquiries we have, and that's causing great concern. For example, we have one inquiry which is being on for 6 years, called the Sheikh Ubahu inquiry. It's cost at least £51 million so far, and there's no end in sight. And the judge who is actually chairing that inquiry has resigned only last week. And in England, we've got difficulties with the grooming inquiry, which has cost £186 million so far, and they're having difficulty with the resignation of chairs, etc. So I'm really interested in seeing how you manage to, in Sweden, ensure that inquiries are not only tedious, but also seem to have a relatively modest cost, and yet they seem to be widely appreciated and accepted by the general public.
So first, for the time when the report should be delivered is in the original directives. Those are normally within 2 years. The mean time today, I think, is 15 months. And so they can be shorter and they can be longer. And we have, for sure, examples of longer, almost permanent committees. But they are then giving a very specific, often analytic and ongoing task. When it comes to cost control, the budget is limited, and there you have the committee is in ongoing contact with the government offices, and they can, of course, ask for an extension of the budget, but otherwise they have to stay within the frames of the budget. But I think the timing is the main issue here. It seems from your example that there was no no specific time limit from the outset. And that is always the case in Swedish public inquiries. You always have a set delivery date from the outset. And you have to ask the government if you need more time there. And the government can obviously grant that extra time or not.
Thank you. I mean, I note that Olof Palme's government in 1982 was keen to restrict timeframes to 2 years, and yet, ironically, the investigation into his own murder appears to have been the longest inquiry in Sweden at 57 months, which is interesting in itself. Dr. Prasser, in Australia, you have had a number of inquiries. We received a document from you saying that the number of governments, there seemed to be quite a seesaw in terms of number of inquiries. Over the last 8 governments that you've looked at, from Mingus to Albanese, there's been 27 Labour and 27 under the Liberals and Nationals. So do you think there's any real difference in terms of how these are approached by the different governments in Australia?
Right, thanks. Look, generally, Labor governments, socialist governments, tend to appoint more inquiries than Liberal governments, Conservative governments, because Labor governments tend to have a more programmatic approach to issues and want to do more things in a way. So I think you need to understand Australia federally, and we've got federal government and state governments, and we have royal commissions which are appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, and we have public inquiries which have no statutory power at all. It's the royal commissions that cost the big money, the big bucks, if you like. And that's because royal commissions tend to be run like, they look like courts, but they're not courts. They're royal commissions and so on. So in Australia, public inquiries and royal commissions and so on are very ad hoc. There's no, unlike Sweden or Nordic countries where they're in commissions of inquiry are integrated into the policy process, in Australia it's totally ad hoc. There may be an important issue that the government of the day may not want to have a royal commission into it. So there's a game going on all the time about that. Now, what's a bit unusually happened in between 2013 and 2022 was a coalition that is Conservative, Liberal government was in power, and it basically appointed about 9 royal commissions. And that's fairly unusual in that sense. It's usually the Labor governments that appoint a lot of royal commissions. And since they lost power in 2022, we've only had 1 royal commission by the current Albanese government. So it varies depending on what the issues are and which government is under sort of pressure. So the pressure is public. Parliament has no role in appointing or involved in a royal commission or any inquiry. Parliament has its own committees, but that's not a public inquiry in that sense. Does that help you at all?
Well, it's interesting to look at the contrast between Australia and here. I mean, obviously the whole issue about public inquiries, I think, here is that people want to have justice for a slight or a perceived slight, or indeed want to look at how, a disaster that's maybe happened can be avoided. Piper Alpha being an obvious one here in Scotland when 167 people died. That was an inquiry that was brought in actually in 13 months at a fairly modest cost, and yet we've subsequently had inquiries, as I touched on earlier, which are costing, exponentially more. I'm just wondering what the trend is in Australia in terms of that kind of cost envelope. Do you think the Royal Commissions that are undertaken in Australia, what kind of budgets are they brought in under? What kind of controls do we have? And has there been a kind of inflationary impact on that, or is it much as it has been over the years?
Well, royal commissions tend to cost more because they have lawyers involved and and representing lawyers and prosecuting lawyers and assistant lawyers, and they tend to last longer. So there's a wide variation in cost, but two recent Royal Commissions have really raised concerns about the costs. The 2013 Royal Commission into child institutional sexual abuse, it cost $340 million. And the reason it cost $340 million, it went for about 4 years because it allowed a lot of the people who had complaints about sexual abuse to be like a truth-telling commission. It was people were allowed to express their viewpoints and didn't have to give evidence under oath. So that made the process longer, and they got assistance. The second Royal Commission, which is only reported last year, was the Royal Commission. These are federal Royal Commissions into disability and abuse, and that's cost $600 million, and that really has caused a lot of people to hit the roof about this problem. It went for 4 years, and the problem with that Royal Commission was it gave a split. It was a multi-member Royal Commission, and its recommendations were split. So it wasn't even after all that money and 4 years, we didn't get definitive recommendations. Okay, so that's raised concerns. Now, there are precedents in Australia for a government to close down a Royal Commission or to make it end more quickly, right? There are examples of that. In 1984, we had a Royal Commission into Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a chemical used by America in Vietnam. Australia was the only Western country that had soldiers. We had a whole army, an air force in Vietnam. And there was a complaint that a lot of those soldiers had cancer. And there was a Royal Commission appointed into it. And the Royal Commissioner findings was, by the way, he thought there was no correlation. And he wanted to conduct a bigger longitudinal study into the matter. And the government said no. And that Royal Commission came to an end, okay? The second Royal Commission that was closed down was what is called the Royal Commission into the Painters and Dockers Union, which is called the Costigan Royal Commission after the chair. And it went into trade union corruption, tax evasion, poor running by the Australian Tax Office, and it really discovered a correlation between the union and tax evasion and bad practices by international banks, and it changed the Australian banking system as a result of that. Now, it was closed down by the Hawke Labor government. The Liberal government appointed it. The Hawke government closed it down because many people thought it was getting too close to particular people in the Labor Party. So after 4 years, the government said, we want you to commit a final report by such and such a date, and that's it. And basically, if they don't do that, the Governor-General will be instructed to withdraw the letters patent from the Royal Commission and will come to an end. It loses all power. So that's a couple of cases like that. So some Royal Commissions only cost $4 or $5 million, if you like, and that's fine. But just remember, in Australia, we've only had we've had 138 Royal Commissions since Federation, since 1901, since we federated. Governments mostly appoint non-statutory inquiries to give policy advice on lots of things, but these inquiries have no power. They're made up of, they do cost money. The famous one in Australia is called the Gonski Review of School Funding, which cost $5 million. It didn't cost very much, went for 2 years. So that's how we sort of do it. So a lot of it is driven by the politics of the situation at the time. That's what happens.
And what's the kind of public perception of these Royal Commissions? I mean, do people have a lot of confidence in them? Because we understand that in Sweden, the public do have confidence in their processes, which seem to be relatively short, sharp and inexpensive relative to, what we just discussed.
Yeah. Well, look, what's this? You know, Australians are basically a bit, what's the word? Sceptical of their governments, if you like.
No.
So there's a sort of a two-pronged process goes on. Whenever there's a problem, and we have royal commissions into bushfires and floods and things like that as well, or major accidents as well, like you do. What happens when there's some problem? Everyone calls for a royal commission. Everyone calls for a royal commission because it's the most powerful body in public inquiry land. A royal commission can make you attend and give evidence. A royal commission can make you give evidence even if it's self-incriminatory. A royal commission can phone tap. Okay, a royal commission can seize documents in your house or whatever. A royal commission can send you to jail if you don't come to the royal commission. You have to answer the questions. It's an inquisitorial body. Now, a lot of people like royal commissions and call for royal commissions because they're usually chaired by a judge or ex-judge. Now, in Australia, we have a policy now of not appointing sitting judges to royal commissions, or they've got to stand down from being a judge. So they've got a lot of prestige, but at the same time, sometimes royal commissions come out not with the answers that people wanted, and therefore they get criticised. So they're called a whitewash, or it wasn't very effective, and so on. So sometimes there are dud royal commissions or royal commissions that don't seem to be as effective as others, if you like. So the Australian public, we tend to like royal commissions because they appear to be more independent than a normal public inquiry. They can attract much more money. So a royal commission into corruption can get more money than an anti-corruption commission. We have anti-corruption commissions in every state and federally. But you know, a royal commission will get $60 million and no one will query it at all. So we like royal commissions, we like their prestige, we like their independence, we like the fact they're all public hearings, we like the fact that their evidence is all released, and so on. And sometimes they get the people they're after. But at the same time, sometimes they don't give the answers that some people who wanted them wanted or expected they would give. There are disappointments, if you like, about what they expected to get. So there's a sort of ambivalent attitude. But generally, when there's a problem, the first default is to call for a royal commission, even when someone got, as you'd probably understand, in Australia we have sharks, and sharks sometimes attack people. Some people got attacked by a shark, and they called for a royal commission into sharks, right? Which no government appointed. But that's what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah.
They're held to be in this sort of high regard.
So I get the impression not necessarily a big fan, and you think there's an over preponderance of these, and it's almost a kind of knee-jerk reaction to any kind of event. I mean, just to call for a royal commission. I mean, I think we have some concerns here that it's a similar situation, that everyone seems to think that a public inquiry is the answer, and as you've pointed out, sometimes people don't get the answer they think that they will get through an inquiry.
Look, one of the debates in Australia was, should we have had a royal commission into the pandemic? Now, you've had part of it, I think, or you've had an inquiry into it, and so has in Sweden had a commission of inquiry. Norway had ones too. New Zealand's got a royal commission into the pandemic. Now, Australia, as you know, constitutionally, all the decisions about health and policing is run by the states. And the Commonwealth government cannot have a royal commission into a state area of responsibility unless the states agree to it. We do have federal state royal commissions from time to time. The one into child sexual abuse was a joint federal state royal commission. But the issue was, should we have had a federal state royal commission into the pandemic? And the federal government, the Labor government came to power, appointed a public inquiry into the pandemic, but the public inquiry has no power. Okay, it can't make anyone do anything. And also, its terms of reference was not to look at what the states were doing. So a lot of people said that inquiry, that public inquiry, was a whitewash to protect the Labor states who were in power during the pandemic. Okay, so we've not had a proper federal state. So there's a lot of debate about that issue in Australia. Should we have had I'm in the camp we should have had a proper open Royal Commission, as is many other people, and some Senate committees in Australia have advocated that. So it varies from time to time, and so on. The big inquiry Royal Commission we've just finished is the Royal Commission into the Robo-Debt Scheme, which is a government program to work out what people should get in social welfare benefits, which the Morrison government, the previous government, brought in, and it went astray. People who didn't owe money were sent bills for money they owed. Now, that got closed down by that government, but the new government, Labor government, has put a Royal Commission into it, obviously, one, to find out how it could be such a shambles that no one knew that the thing was illegal, and B, to get at the previous government. Okay, so that's what happens. So it's quite political in a sense. Okay. It's raised very good points. I've sort of agreed there should have been a Royal Commission into that issue, but they appointed a Royal Commission into that issue, but not a Royal Commission into the pandemic. There's the game.
Okay, thank you. Professor Dahlstrom, you wanted to come in?
So I just wanted to point out that there is quite a big difference with public inquiries in Sweden compared to the royal commissions that Dr. Brasser just discussed. So there are no investigative inquiries that have the powers of equal to the royal commissions that were just discussed. One should also note that most public inquiries are looking into policy and give policy advice, suggest legislation. Only less than 1% of all the public inquiries are investigative inquiries of the sort that you just discussed. So that is important to keep in mind. And as for the costs of the entire system, I think that the entire system in Sweden, all the public inquiries cost about 40 to 50 million pounds a year, but that's for all the commissions. And then we're talking about around 150 different commissions sitting per year.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, one of the things I think which is significant in terms of your own submission is you've talked about the fact that there's government offices which provide administrative services to commissions of inquiry, and these include fully furnished office rooms, IT and telecommunications equipment, and information advice on administrative matters and archives. Now, from my perspective, that sounds to me a remarkably sensible approach, given the fact that often when we have inquiries, say you have to reinvent the wheel, and before the inquiries can kick off, it can take many months, not just trying to find an appropriate chair, etc., but also trying to find premises and get a secretariat and all that together. So how impactful is this in terms of the ability in Sweden to not only make sure that commissions start promptly, but also to rein in costs?
So I have a hard time to say how important it is for keeping costs down, but I can say that given that there are between 60 and 100 new commissions every year in Sweden, the routine for setting up such commissions or public inquiries are extensive. And as you just noted, there is a special unit at the government offices only handling these issues and helping with all the practicalities around the public inquiry.
Okay, thank you. Now, one of the things you said is, of course, our commissions have no specific power to compel private individuals or entities to provide them information or testimony. So I'm just wondering what the implications of that are. And what is the role of the legal profession in terms of inquiries in Sweden?
Right. So we need to think about the role of public inquiries in Sweden generally. That is part of the ordinary policy process. So we should think about it more as an ad hoc agency with a power similar to a normal agency. And when we compare to what Dr. Prasser discussed with the Royal Commissions, that is more of a policing body of sorts, or something similar to that. I'm not sure if Dr. Prasser agrees there, and he's much more knowledgeable when it comes to those things. So listen to him when it comes to that. But in Sweden, it's more of an ad hoc agency with the powers of looking into new policy suggestions, comparing evidence on a statistical basis, of course, also interviewing people, etc. So I don't know if that is helpful for you, but that is, I think, what I can say. We could go into details when it comes to the Corona Commission. That was one, and I think a positive example of how one investigative inquiry can function.
I mean, I want to let my colleagues in, so I don't want to go on too much longer, to be honest, but I'm thinking about major investigative inquiries. So if we think about the Estonia maritime disaster, this lasted 24.9 months. 852 people died in that disaster. I remember it very vividly. And in Estonia last year, I looked at the memorial when I was in Tallinn, when we as a committee were in Tallinn. I'm just wondering, for something as emotive as that, if you can't compel witnesses, how difficult is it to actually get the kind of outcome that would be desirable by the kind of families of the victims, etc.? Because throughout your paper, you talk about how this system has a very high kind of public acceptance in Sweden. So I'm just wondering, in cases like that, as I said, where would the legal profession be involved, and what would the impact of that be on the kind of delivery of that inquiry?
No, I think that you are right pointing to that inquiry. I think that has not been accepted by the victims and the victims' families as a definitive answer to what happened during that disaster. So I think that you are right. That is definitely a downside of the Swedish system. You might have had a higher acceptance of that inquiry if you had the possibility to compel witnesses to give witness. So that might be one example of when it's not working as it's supposed to. But again, let me point to the fact that the general system is not designed to deliver investigating inquiries, but to give policy advice and to look at the broader implications of new policies. Maybe also lay the ground for compromise and consensus.
Okay, and finally, although you're not allowed to compel witnesses under the Swedish system, is there a feeling that people generally, although not compelled, do attend? I mean, the implication there is that perhaps one or two vital witnesses decided not to give evidence. Is that the case? Because one would have thought that the kind of general pressure would be that even though you're not compelled to, people would feel obliged to attend and participate.
Yeah, so here I have no systematic evidence to lean on, so we need to be quite careful. But my impression is that people will generally give witness and that they would feel the pressure to do so. So that's how it generally works.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to other colleagues in. First will be Liz, to be followed by Michelle.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming in to speak to us from your various parts of the world. One of the issues that we are facing in Scotland is that the increasing number of public inquiries that we are being asked to conduct is as a result of or perceived failure of public services. We've had quite a number of inquiries that have been set up because whether it's the health service or education service or justice service, it is not performing. And I just wondered if you, either in Sweden or Australia, are seeing any trend for your royal commissions or for your investigations. Are you seeing that trend at all? And perhaps come to Professor Dahlström first.
So I don't think that I see a trend of more that people ask for more of investigative inquiries. They are less than 1% of the total number of public inquiries in Sweden. So when we had around 3,000 inquiries between 1990 and 2016, only 16 or 17 of them were investigating inquiries. But there are examples of when they have been important. And the Corona Commission is one such example where you have had legal and other experts going through the handling of the Corona pandemic and delivered also quite critical reports.
Just on that, ask about the Australian situation. You mentioned when you were answering the convener that there are occasions where new directives are set out. Could you give an example of where the sort of terms of reference have been changed or extended?
So that's quite common when it comes to the public inquiries that they issue new directives. It could be, for example, after a new election, when a new government is coming in, then the new government will typically have around 100 sitting inquiries. They can totally shut them down if they want to. But they do with some of them, but they can also give new directives to some of these ones. Maybe if they would like to suggest a policy, but maybe not exactly the same policy as the previous government.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Would in some of these circumstances, would you have pressure from those people who want the public inquiry, perhaps they're victims of some perceived malpractice? Would you have them pressurising government to make the changes?
Right. Again, I think that we should make a distinction between the absolute majority of the policy public inquiries and the very few investigative inquiries. I think that if we had the Corona Commission and a new government was coming in and would shut that inquiry down, I think that would have been a hard sell in the eye of the public. So I think that there is definitely a pressure not to do so when it comes to investigative inquiries. And it's less common to give new directive to those. But when it comes to the policy ones, it is quite common to give new directives or to shut them down. But we can also note that the Swedish government has the power to shut down all inquiries on one day if they want to, and start new ones. So that is the power that lays with the government. They don't need to check with the parliament or anyone else. It's within their own powers.
I'll come back to the question of these policy ones in just a minute, but could I just ask Dr Desser about the Australian situation? Do you perceive that there's a growing disquiet with public services?
No, is the answer. I mean, there's a lot of reviews, public inquiries that are not royal commissions, they have no power, into a whole range of different areas of policy. They're all about trying to make things better. You know, how can we improve the curriculum? How can we've had 3 inquiries into teacher education issues, okay? So they're not regarded as big failures. There's lots of policies. Government want to do new things. I mean, a famous inquiry, a non-statutory inquiry in Australia, was the Campbell inquiry into financial deregulation, appointed by the Fraser government, Conservative, reported 1981, not implemented very much. The incoming new government had another inquiry into the same issue, which endorsed the same recommendations, and that's how Australia got a floating dollar deregulation banking system from that inquiry, okay? So there's always different reviews about reviewing legislation, reviewing school funding, reviewing the health system or so on. They're not seen as particularly problematic. They're just, how do we make something better, and so on. So that's the general view. There's not a sense of government failure as such or public service failure. There has been a Royal Commission into the Commonwealth Public Service in 1974, 75, not because there was anything dramatically wrong. There hadn't been a Royal Commission for 50 years into that topic. They thought they should have one. We had a Royal Commission into FM broadcasting. Should we have FM broadcasting in Australia, right? So, and lots of inquiries into a whole range of different policy issues, which have often been quite important in making differences. The famous one in the 50s was an inquiry into universities. The Commonwealth government did not give money to universities till the 1960s, and because they had no constitutional power. But the Prime Minister at the time, Robert Menzies, was a very big believer in education. And so we had this inquiry, and that led to the Commonwealth government taking over eventually all running of all universities in Australia. They're all run by the Commonwealth government. That sort of may or may not help you.
Yeah, yes, it does. It's very helpful. But the more each of you talks about your own jurisdiction, the more it comes across that your situation is actually very different from what's happening in Scotland. Namely, quite a lot of your inquiries or commissions are about policy issues, whereas we're seeing an increasing number of investigative public inquiries. And what I wanted to ask you both is, in terms of the investigative inquiries that you do have, few in number perhaps, do you find that those who have asked for the inquiry, or the situation that is being investigated, do you find that there is general satisfaction at the end of the inquiry, that it's come up with the right results and been able to ascertain where blame might lie or increase the accountability? Do you find that?
I could answer. Look, on the ones, the child sexual abuse one, 2013, general view that raised the right issues and was very effective. We've had a Royal Commission into veteran suicide in Australia, which only reported last year. Now, how you tackle veteran suicide and how you stop it is to me, a very difficult issue. I think there are still some families who are not happy. But it was quite an involved Royal Commission. The person who chaired it was a former Deputy Commissioner of Police at a state level. I think there's been concern with the Royal Commission to aged care quality, that the government's not spending enough money on aged care, which is a Commonwealth responsibility. So you always get those sort of stories, if you like, about those sort of inquiries. So some people often think that a Royal Commission can solve all problems. We've had a Royal Commission to banking. People are very unhappy about the private banking system. and foreclosures and all those sort of things. And yes, it found lots of issues, but there's still some agitation that people are still unhappy. I mean, I don't know too many people happy about their bank, but that's the problem. So there's all those sort of examples. In Queensland, where I come from, which is a state, we had what was called an overseas doctor scandal. That is, overseas doctors were being employed in the public health system who were not properly qualified or who had bad records and had not been checked properly. And we actually had 2 royal commissions into that topic. And the second one is an outstanding royal commission. It really exposed the problems by both sort of governments and there's basically tightened up the whole procedures about employing people with overseas qualifications into the Australian or Queensland health system. So there's some examples. May I help you?
Thank you very much. And is that the case in Sweden as well, that generally speaking, there is reasonable satisfaction with the process?
Yeah, I think that it is. So you have a reasonable satisfaction, but as we discussed earlier, there are important examples of investigative inquiries that have not really reached that level of satisfaction. The Estonia disaster is one such example. And another example would be the inquiry looking into the investigations and the handling of the murder of our Prime Minister Olof Palme. So I think both of them are examples where the general public were not satisfied, I think. But the Corona Commission that I mentioned earlier would be an example of the opposite, where I think that we had much more of satisfaction in the general public after the delivery of that report.
Thank you both. My last question, just to each of you, is the public generally satisfied that these inquiries don't cost too much and that the timescale is acceptable, or do you have any kickback from the public in your countries about it becoming a bit too expensive or too much time's taken up on them?
So I think if I answer for Sweden, I think that this is not a big issue at all. So I don't think that there is a discussion going on concerning the cost of the inquiry system. And I think that there is a satisfaction with the policy process as a whole, and I believe that. That especially when it comes to the policy proposal and how those are handled, I think the acceptance is quite high.
Thank you.
In Australia, I think you'd say every now and again, from time to time, the media runs a story about the cost of royal commissions, okay? Or in particular, royal commission, not the non-statutory ones, which are at the cheaper end of the scale. So you'll see I'll get a phone call and they'll have a whole list of what these royal commissions have cost, how many days they've sat, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So every now and again, when the media maybe have nothing else to do or looking for a story, they will run a story like that. And you'll get the cynical, skeptical comment, oh, well, another royal commission, our royal commissioners get paid, by the way, okay? They get paid millions of dollars to chair. Okay, you can become a millionaire by sharing a royal commission. So they get paid, and you pay all the lawyers who work for them, who are assisting the royal commission, who so on. So it becomes a big, what is called a lawyer's picnic, that everyone gets in on this bandwagon. Now, non-statutory inquiries, I've worked for ministers where we've managed a non-statutory inquiry. And we are pretty tight on how's the budget going. Oh, look, the committee wants to go. One committee I was involved in overseeing, the chair wanted to go to United States. I said no. Okay, that was the end of the story. You're not going. Okay, the minister said no. So But that's not a Royal Commission. A Royal Commission is a different game altogether, and that's what you've got to appreciate.
Well, thank you very much for your evidence. It's been extremely helpful. Thank you.
Michelle, to be followed by Joan.
Good morning, both. Thank you very much for joining us and reflect what my colleague Liz Smith said. I'm interested in you thinking about your own particular cultures, and I mean cultures not just within your states or your sub-states, but within your legal profession, within culture, within the media and so on. And I wonder, to what extent is culture and trust a consideration in the type of inquiry that is agreed in your jurisdiction? And the reason I ask that question is I find myself reflecting that, is it the case within the UK that trust is very low in institutions, and that has, in people's eyes, necessitated the need for these judge-led inquiries with the resultant issues? I think both of you may have a reflection or a perspective about the UK and indeed Scotland from the outside looking in that I'd be interested in hearing as well. So perhaps you could go first, Professor Dahlström, and reflect a little on trust and culture within Sweden, and then give us some reflections on what you see from the outside looking in. Thank you.
So that is a very interesting but also difficult question. But when I start looking at the Swedish system, I think that trust in government and in the policy process is an important part of the story. If we look at the public inquiry system over a couple of decades, I think that has also been a part of building that trust. Looking back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, even the 80s, several of the inquiries included members from both sides of the political aisle. So you had opposition represented in the commission, giving them full access to all investigations, etc. So that built the trust. That was an important part of how these policy inquiries worked. And from outside observers looking at Sweden, that has been something that have been praised in different reports, etc. So, but over time and today, those inquiries, which I would call parliamentary inquiries or parliamentary commissions, etc., though those have been gone from being around 50% of all the inquiries in the 70s to maybe 2-3% today. So those are that kind of compromise building is no longer really a big part of the Swedish system, but it was, and it was then held in high regard. Looking at Scotland, I think that you're onto something with your question for sure when it comes to how citizens in general view the state. I think that the trust is higher in Sweden generally, but I'm a little bit hesitant to say anything more than that. I think that like making causal claims of how this works is a little bit tough.
You're being very diplomatic, so perhaps I can hear from Dr. Prasser now for similar reflections. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, all the surveys keep saying in Western countries and in Australia that there's been a decline in trust. Now, I don't quite buy it in a sense, okay? If you ask someone, do you trust government? or ask in a certain way, you're going to get a negative sort of answer in a sense. You know, we basically don't like politicians. They're all in it for what they're going to get, and all that, even though I think politicians are underpaid and overworked and all that sort of stuff. So I just want to give you an example of what I mean. The first Federal Royal Commission in Australia was in 902. Soldiers coming back from the Boer War, Australian states, before we were federated, sent soldiers to the Boer War to help the British or the English, okay? On the way back on the boat, 16 died. This led to the new federal government appointing a Royal Commission. They appointed a Royal Commission, but then they had no power. Then they passed the Royal Commission Act. The report came out and said a number of things, and to people knocking what the Royal Commission was saying.
Dr. Prasser,
So-
sorry if we lost you for a minute there, so would you mind just going back to the story about the boat at the point at which a Royal Commission was set up? Thank you very much.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. So the first Australian Federal Royal Commission was in 902 when soldiers coming back from the Boer War died. Australian states, colonies, sent soldiers to the Boer War to help the British, the Empire. And on the way back, a number of soldiers died. The new federal government decided to appoint a Royal Commission. It was the Governor-General issued the letters patent. It had no power. So Parliament passed the Royal Commission Act, which is still operational, greatly changed. The Royal Commission reported, and a lot of people said it was a whitewash. So there was criticism about that Royal Commission of not being effective. Our second Royal Commission was where should we locate the capital of the country? And the recommendation they made was not the one that was followed, right? Okay. So from the word go, we've had this sort of skepticism about these things. But overall, Australia, there is a culture of, you may have heard called the tall poppy syndrome in Australia, where we don't really like people, no matter how rich they might be, how smart they might be, or whatever, spruiking. So there's a view about politicians and about governments, which is overall a bit negative, even though we rely on government dramatically to do just about, to build the railways, national health system, and so on. So there is that sort of scepticism. What public inquiries and royal commissions, if properly set up, do, it's their independence that people like about them, that sometimes they criticise the government that appoints them, that people get found out with their hands in the till or fraud or whatever. So royal commissions in many ways have helped, although being critical, have helped highlight problems about these things. So there is that sort of culture all the time of being critical of politicians at all, and our politicians were paid a wage before English politicians were, and so on. We had universal suffrage in 902 before many other countries. So we've got a very strong democratic tradition. Our Senate's always been elected before the American Senate was directly elected. So we've got a very strong democratic tradition, but also a very sceptical tradition about people's motivations, if you like. So I think that feeds into the point you're making. As for the Scottish model, we're quite fascinated that Scotland's got its own parliament. Of course, this is sort of an interesting development and this independent sort of structure. So we understand Scotland is a small country of 5 million people or so on, and therefore it needs to be economical about what it goes. And you can have too many inquiries and too many public inquiries, which leads to policy inertia, if you like. And I'm, in the end, believe that elected politicians should make the decisions we shouldn't be governed by commissions or by public inquiries. They are merely advisory mechanisms to the government of the day. And I think we can sometimes governments, there was a comment in Australia when we had 9 royal commissions established under the coalition government last 10 years, that we had the cult of the Royal Commission. That is, we were flicking too many things for the Royal Commission to solve both the policy problem and the political problem. Governments could not cope with the fragmentation of public opinion that was going on, which is affecting all Western societies. So I think that's something that Scotland should be aware of. I'm not over thinking that the inquiry can solve every policy problem and solve the politics. In the end, the elected politician should be the one making the decisions, not commissions.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you. John, to be followed by Craig.
Thanks very much, convener, and thanks for all the evidence so far. It's been really interesting. So if I can just pick up a few points. I mean, I was interested, if I can start with yourself, Professor Dahlstrom, that there was general public, I think, acceptance of the Coronavirus Commission and its results. And it was incredibly quick. I mean, it started, as I understand it, in June 2020 and completed in February 22. So that was under 2 years and cost very little money. And I'm actually wondering, I mean, because Sweden was very interesting because a lot of people here felt we should be copying Sweden instead of the people we did copy. So it was, in one sense, it was quite controversial what your country did. And yet all this happened very quickly. Was it too quick in a sense? I mean, would there have been an advantage if it had gone either started a bit later or gone on a bit longer?
Oh, thank you. Now I'm unmuted. So it's of course very hard to say if the Commission could have gone further, but I do stand with my previous conclusion that the results was quite generally accepted, and I think that the reason is that the chairperson was a legal scholar. But the members of the Commission were all experts, mainly from academia, with no ties to any political parties, etc. And what that Commission did, it had a reasonable budget, not super large, but they reached out to the academic community and started many sub-inquiries, you might say, looking into, for example, the death in elder care home facilities, presenting academic reports on the reasons there, looking into, for example, the ownership structures. If private care homes had more death than, for example, public ones, or if for-profit was worse than non-profit profit ones, etc. So the structure of that commission, leaning very heavily on neutral expertise, I think that was the key issue why it was accepted.
Okay, thanks for that. And that kind of brings up the question of as I understand it, both you and Australia, when you have a commission, there's a number of people on the commission. It's not just one chair, because our tendency is that we have one chair who seems to do everything. Is it an advantage? I mean, we had the example where a commission was split. I think that was the Australian one, so that maybe wasn't helpful. But is it your feeling that having a group of people as the commission is better than having one person?
So it depends very much on what you want to achieve. I should say that even though I'm referring to commissions and public inquiries in plural, there are also quite often what in Sweden is referred to as special investigators. They are operating within the same system. Then you have just one single person maybe she or he could be backed up by a secretary, and he or she could have the powers to reach out to experts, etc. But it's one person, and that is not uncommon. And it has been become more common over time. So we have more of the special investigators today in Sweden than we had in the 80s or 90s. That's for sure. When it comes to these more investigative inquiries, I think there it is quite important that you have a group of people, and the neutrality is important for the political neutrality is important for the general public, and that those are all quite often working together with experts, or maybe even you might even have a majority of experts within the field being there for their academic merits rather than other issues. I think that is important.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Dr. Prasser, is that kind of the same in Australia, that having a group of people rather than just one is the norm?
Well, yes and no. Look, to me, the ones which are really probing corruption should be single-person ones. So the ones that really probe corruption, like into the Costigan Royal Commission, was a single person. The Royal Commissions around the states into corruption tend to be single people. Where we had the Royal Commission to disability abuse and so on had 7 people on it, and that starts to become more a representative group of people trying to get everyone from all sorts of things. And that Royal Commission was the one that had costing $600 million, and they came up with split decisions on a number of key issues. You know, should we have special skills or not have special skills, which is a big issue. So I'm in the camp, I suppose, that on issues that have broader policy areas, a couple of people, yes. So the Royal Commission into detention of youth had 2 people on it. The Royal Commission into the banking had 1 person on it. The veteran suicide one had 3 in it. Someone from the veterans community had to be on that commission. So it's a bit of horses for courses in a sense. But the trouble with the non-statutory inquiries we talk about, that's where you'll see a much wider range of membership, because they tend to try to include not just experts, but also people who represent different interests under them and so on. I think in an inquisitorial Royal Commission, it should be seeking the truth, not trying to have an approximation of what people find acceptable, okay? So I think there's a problem if you have too many people on board, and it becomes, and I've talked to chairs of, of inquiries and trying to get everyone to agree to the final report. We don't have too many minority reports from Royal. We have a couple, very rare, but if you have too many on it, that's what's going to happen. And when that happens, the value of the Royal Commission declines. The government can say, well, look, this Royal Commission said A, and part of the Royal Commission said B. We'll make our own decision what to do about that Royal Commission recommendation.
Okay, thanks. That's also very helpful. Going back to Sweden, Professor Dahlström, as I understand it, most of you, and I think the same case in Norway, that the inquiries take place in private, not in public. Can you give us a bit about why that's the case, and if you feel that's an advantage or a disadvantage?
Right. So for policy inquiries, where you need also to discuss different positions for different parties, etc. I think that is important to have that opportunity to discuss very different standpoints. So that's right. There are, of course, negative parts also with this. You might have less legitimacy for the system, but I don't believe that this is a big issue when it comes to the public inquiries. All documentations, etc., that is open for that is transparent also in the Swedish system. So I think what you are referring to when you say that it is in private, all discussions are behind closed doors, so to say, almost all discussions if they don't have a public hearing.
Okay, maybe I could just press you on that a little bit, because, for example, with the COVID inquiry here, one of the big aims, I think, has been to allow victims, like family members who lost somebody in a care home, to have the opportunity to speak and share their experience and all of that kind of thing. So would that also be public, that kind of aspect be public in Sweden?
So it could be if it was a public hearing, but when they give evidence to the Commission, the interviews will not necessarily be public.
Okay, thanks. And just a couple of other points, I think, both in relation to Sweden. As I understand it, if there's recommendations, there has to be a proposal as to how these will be funded. Is that the case?
So if it affects if it affects Sweden financially, that needs to be cleared out, so to speak. You have to discuss that. That needs to be obvious from the investigation. But they do not necessarily need to come up with a proposal of how it will be funded. That could be a part of a different inquiry if that is needed.
Okay, and then when the proposals come up, if I'm understanding this correctly, they then get circulated around a number of bodies, and these bodies can then respond. And I think the suggestion is if a lot are negative, then the government might not go ahead with it. Is that always the case, that the kind of final proposal is always put out for consultation?
That is correct. That's called the referral system in Sweden, and that is actually protected in the constitution. So the government needs to take advice from those bodies in society that are affected. But they don't have to follow their advice, but they have to ask for their advice. So when you have the policy process is such that you have the minister might have an idea that he or she then puts together an inquiry that looks into the issue at hand and then makes a proposal. That proposal goes out to, for example, trade unions, but all business organizations, but also to municipalities, agencies, etc. Those write short written reports back to the government. The government then decides how to proceed with this. Either they write a bill, maybe with a slightly updated proposal, or they decide to just throw everything in the bin, or something in between there.
Okay, thanks very much, both of you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig, to be followed by Michael.
Thank you, and good morning. It's been put to us by some witnesses that have come before us that there is essentially, in the Scottish context, a trade-off between the time, cost and the quality of public inquiries. Given that both your jurisdictions seem to be doing them quicker than we are, it would just be interesting to get your reflections on that observation, because that is one of the positions that has been put to us quite regularly from those who've been involved in UK public inquiries, that if they are shorter, you're effectively potentially diluting the quality of the inquiry. Just be interesting to get your reflections from both of your jurisdictions. Perhaps, Professor Dahlström, you might want to come first from a Swedish perspective.
So I can be quite short here. I can just say that over time, and now I'm talking about maybe even a 40-year time period, they have become shorter in Sweden, and that has also led to some criticism that they're not serving the same purpose as before, and that would be to lay the ground for compromise and finding rational solutions on to policy problems. So that you have that kind of criticism also in Sweden, but again, even given that that fact, I think there is still acceptance of the system.
In Australia, Royal Commissions, we're talking about those sort of bodies, they can range from reporting in 5 months to 4 years. The average length of a Royal Commission is about 2 years overall. The Royal Commission into the national bushfires was 10 months. Okay, so very quick. The non-statutory inquiries we talk about usually are less than 12 months. It can be usually 6 to 7 months. Okay, but where you get into a Royal Commission like the aged care one, where people want to come forth and give their experiences, or the disability one, that's becoming a truth commission type body or reconciliation, and that consumes vast amounts of time and vast amounts of resources. So I think you need a separate process. I think the aged care Royal Commission could have been done much more quickly had they just gone to the crux of the issue and not tried to do all that other process. And the same with the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse. It's 3-4 years, and a lot of it was taken up with those sort of processes. So you've got to make a decision what you want the Royal Commission to be. Is it going to get at the truth of the matter, or is it going to be a truth-telling reconciliation type body? Trying to do both adds to a problem and clouds what the Royal Commission can do. So certainly in Australia, I think you're right. I think in Australia, certainly has been a concern that we've had a government who are appointing too many commissions. The Whitlam Labor government, in 3 years of office, appointed 13 Royal Commissions. And it was regarded as out of control. So you have that political game going on. The electorate sort of expresses their frustration why another commission. But I think it's got to be careful how you structure a Royal Commission. Some Royal Commissions are really very efficient because they're run by someone very competent who knows how to run it. Okay, the Royal Commission into the overseas doctor scandal in Queensland, the second one, was run by Jeff Davies, a former head of the Court of Appeal, and it's a brilliantly written Royal Commission. Everyone should read it. He picked up the pieces of the previous one that got closed down, and he did it extremely quickly. He did it in 6 months, basically. So there we are. It's really the competency of the people running it. And I think if the commission doesn't quite know what it's there for, why is it being appointed, that just leaves it to go for a fishing expedition, and that becomes a very expensive fishing expedition.
Dr. Preston, I think I'm reading your comments that you may have a similar, or certain governments may have a similar problem to governments here. It's been put to us by some witnesses that effectively when a political storm hits, be that post-COVID or in relation to perhaps a death in police custody or something, the minister wants the issue off their desk. So regardless of what might be the best solution to actually addressing the issue, they gold plate it by going for a public inquiry. Is that something similar you've seen in Australia? And how do you guard against that? I suppose in a social media age where it's much easier to inflame public opinion.
Well, it can, and I think a lot of it's got to do. I mean, our greatest Prime Minister was Robert Menzies, who was Prime Minister for 16 years. And in his whole time as Prime Minister, we only had 5 Royal Commissions. He was a great lawyer too, of course. And he was very reluctant to appoint Royal Commissions because he had this very odd idea that the government makes the decisions. That's essentially, we had the famous Petrov Espionage Royal Commission if you like, which is quite controversial. So it's really governments. It's a quality of your politicians. I'm sorry, if they're willing to sort of say we're not going to have a Royal Commission in this area. But look, the Turnbull government dilly-dallied around for 12 months about whether there should be a Royal Commission into banking in 2016. And they referred it to, the stock exchange people to look at. And and Turnbull was under such pressure after he almost lost the 2016 election, he eventually appointed a Royal Commission. He would have been better doing it straight away and ending all the trauma. But for 12 months, he said, we don't need it. And then suddenly we got one. So it's the politics and where the government is in its electoral cycle that we're going. Now, the present government has got 2/3 of the representative of the House of Representatives, it's just won a big election. It can really thumb its nose at anyone saying it should have a Royal Commission do anything. And there are probably issues it should do, but it's not going to do it. So it's the political vibrancy of the government of the day and the leadership that really affects these things, because Royal Commissions are all decided by the government. No one else decides there's going to be a Royal Commission. That's all it is to it. There's no parliamentary input. It's this political, everything is politics, and that's the way it is.
Perhaps bring Professor Dahlstrom in there at that point. Is there a sort of similar political dynamic in Sweden, or is it done in a slightly more rational way?
So it's you definitely have the criticism that the government might want to get things off their table, and it's a convenient way of doing that when putting a public inquiry together. So that will give them a little bit of space, not needing to discuss maybe a controversial issue. But if one systematically and over time look at the timing of when public inquiries are put together, that points very clearly to the fact that almost all public inquiries are put up in the beginning of the mandate period and reported during the mandate period. Very few are put up towards the very end of the mandate period, which would could otherwise have indicated that you want to get rid of things before the election, the upcoming election, for example. So I think the evidence point to that these inquiries are actually used the way they are supposed to, namely to come up with, look into problems, come up with policy solutions, and then lay the ground for a bill from the government. I think there are little evidence suggesting that they are actually used to get things off the table. So that's for the scientific evidence in this field. But having said that, I think it's still something that is quite often said from political commentators, and may affect the public's view on these commissions.
Thank you. I've got those are the sort of more general questions. I've just got two specific questions, one for each of you, gentlemen, if I may. Professor Dahlstrom, I think it's been referred to in terms of the remuneration that those who chair inquiries receive, and there is a concern in Scotland that obviously there are some lawyers and there have been some chairs who've received very significant amounts of public money for chairing inquiries. I noted that in Sweden there is the chairman or those who lead inquiries can either receive a lump sum or a monthly fee. Our concern around a monthly fee was that, that potentially you can run the clock down on that. So I was just wondering what the mechanism is for determining how those leading inquiries are effectively paid.
Right. So I don't think that I can give you a very specific answer of what decides whether you would get a monthly salary or a lump sum. I think that is very specific to each and every inquiry. But comparing to what's been said here earlier, that you can become a millionaire by running a public inquiry, that is certainly not the case in Sweden. So the share would have then a monthly salary comparable to what she or he has earned before, and not more than that. As for the members, they will actually get very little. They will only get compensation for income that they didn't get. So if they put in 1 day in their ordinary job, they might get compensated for their income loss, but they won't get anything extra. I don't know if that helps you. I'm sorry that I cannot say why you sometimes get a lump sum or why you sometimes would get a monthly salary. I think that it has more to do with how that individual is running, if that one is employed at the time somewhere else or not.
Yeah, that's helpful. And also, I think you made reference to the fact you can't become a millionaire doing it then. Well, there is that concern here. One of the other concerns, I think perhaps both of you might want to address at this point, is organisations such as Police Scotland are saying that they are facing very, very significant costs because they have to tool up and provide the manpower to engage with almost all of the public inquiries here. What provision is made for those third-party groups, often state, forming part of the state, either government bodies or law enforcement agencies? How are they funded, if at all, for their engagement and costs that are incurred for engaging with public inquiries in both Australia and Sweden?
Well, in Australia, none. It's like if they want to appear before a parliamentary committee or request to appear before a parliamentary committee, that's their role and duty. It's like, we have in Australia a Senate Estimates Committee. So, government departments, 20 people from a government department will be sitting in a room for a whole day. So if you're called in a Royal Commission, if you're called to give evidence, you come and give evidence, and that's just it. And if we're having an inquiry into police corruption, we don't really care whether you're out of pocket or whatever. We're investigating you because we think you're corrupt. Now, not all Royal Commissions are like that, but generally it's up to the individuals. In the non-statutory inquiries, it's up to what people want to participate or not. So they don't want to get involved in it, but if it's an important inquiry and they don't appear, their views are not being expressed and they could get criticised or so on. So they've got to make those sort of decisions. But there's in my discussions, or I've never seen any idea of government paying people to have to, for their giving evidence or their being taken out of the workforce to do certain things. So that's how that operates in there. So I understand the problem that Police Scotland are having. If you've got lots of inquiries, they take up time. The senior CEO has got to appear before them. That's a big take of time. So that's an issue that has to be managed. So too many inquiries can be problematic.
Of course. I'm not sure, Professor Dahlström, you have a...
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's quite similar in Sweden that you don't get any compensation really for, and definitely not to other agencies. Maybe one could say just one or note that if, for example, you would order a statistical investigation into something, or if you need to make an analysis of large registers, that might be, so to speak, bought from the sitting commission and bought from another agency. So that might be the only exception. But then it's one specific transaction that is needed.
Professor, I note that the state of Victoria has introduced a formal mechanism which is intended to try and ensure that recommendations are implemented. I was just wondering if you have any insight into how effective that mechanism is and how it actually is formulated.
This is the recommendations?
Yes, yeah.
Look, there's two views about making the recommendations. One view is that a commission or inquiry just goes ahead and recommends what it thinks should happen. That's it. They don't take any into account the cost or whether it's politically acceptable. They say, we're the expert, this is what we think. The other view expressed by some chairmen is they try to work out what's practical, what's going to be accepted. And so they try to modify the recommendations that are not over the top. The complaint against some royal commissions into disasters is that they think that the government has got no other call on their funding except the disaster. So they often come up with recommendations that are just too expensive and have no appreciation that governments can't do everything. So those royal commissions tend to get sidelined very quickly. So the inquiries that take into account the practicalities of doing something, like it's no use a federal royal commission recommending something that the Commonwealth government has got no power over, right? It's a state responsibility. So it's no use saying, oh, the Commonwealth should do something about classrooms. Well, the Commonwealth doesn't run schools, so it can't do anything about classrooms. It can negotiate, but it can't do anything about it. So to me, those commissions or committees that are looking at things in a much more practical way, they can do lots of things to make their recommendations more acceptable. They can have, and the way they frame them and the time frames for them. If it's take it or leave it approach, that often means that the government will leave it rather than take it.
In your book, Dr. Prasa, there's a chapter by Dr. Anita Mackay looking at what's happening in Victoria that I think it's stated that offers insight for other jurisdictions. And that does identify there's a formal mechanism in place to monitor the implementation of recommendations within the state of Victoria. So I was just wondering if you could just elaborate on that, how effective that mechanism is and what the specific mechanics of it actually are.
Yeah, and that's a new Inquiries Act which has come through, we had in Australia the Australian Law Reform Commission reviewed the Royal Commission Act in 2009, and they did not propose an idea of there should be some formal mechanism. Victoria's gone down a slightly different path. So at the federal level, there's no mechanism to oversight what happens to the recommendations. There's no, parliamentary committees, the government's got to respond to in 6 months. Royal Commission reports, the government's haven't got to respond to at all. Okay, that's federally. At the state level, and there is that mechanism that's been developed. But I think we've already had a Royal Commission in Victoria called the Lawyer X Royal Commission, which basically the government disbanded the follow-up process. So again, it's driven by the politics. Okay, so I think governments don't like being told what they should do with the recommendations. So federally, there are no mechanism to do that, and any attempt to do so would just not get a start at all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Convener. Professor Dahlström, in Sweden, the government offices have a special unit called the Commissions Service. Could you tell us a little bit about the operation of that office?
So that helps with all the practical issues for each public inquiry. It helps with setting up with salaries and helping with finding localities, etc. So it is very much a unit that handles practical issues.
Those issues are handled on a case-by-case basis by the chair of the inquiry. And I suppose we've had some evidence so far that there might be concerns if there was a central unit provided, that there might be issues about questions of independence of how those different commissions or inquiries, in our case, are run. Have there been any concerns in that regard in Sweden?
No, not really. And the reason is that the power already lays with the government. So the government could as I said, formally just abandon all sitting commissions from one day to another. So that system builds on the trust that the government will not do so. So in that perspective, having a central unit is quite a small thing.
Dr. Prasser, is there any similar facility within the Australian model?
Federally, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, which is quite a big department, by the way, it's got 300 people in it. There is a sort of a unit that looks after, because Royal Commissions are recommended by the Prime Minister to the Governor General. So the Prime Minister's department sort of has some carriage of it. But that's a pretty minor post-op mailbox sort of role. Once a Royal Commission is established, it's the relevant topic, it's the relevant department that gets involved in giving it support. But basically, they tend to start from scratch a bit. There's usually secondment of people from the department, but they usually start from scratch. And before a government announces a Royal Commission, they normally have already sorted out who's going to be the chair of the Royal Commission. And even the supporting legal team would have had some appointment discussion going on before it gets announced. But there's nothing like, I do like the Swedish model, by the way, because what happens with a lot of inquiries, we go around looking for even rooms to find where the inquiry is going to meet and all that sort of stuff. I think it's a very sensible idea. But federally, not really, and at the state level, definitely not.
Then, Dr. Prasser, would you find, as a new chair of one of these commissions, where would you find a statement of precedent or best practice as to how you might go about it? Is there such a thing?
Look, the best thing, I think you should look at the Australian Law Reform Commission report on the Royal Commission Act, which is all about Royal Commissions, basically. And it had several Royal Commissioners on that review. And they did talk about developing a sort of guideline or guidebook for Royal Commission. Now, that was strongly resisted by the former Royal Commissioners, former judges who were on that committee. I was with them. I was in that committee. And they said they will decide the process they will use. It's not for anyone to tell them how to run their Royal Commission. So you had two quite different judges, former judges, from different sides of the political fence, but both in agreement that they didn't want a guideline about how to run a Royal Commission, if you like. But I think that Law Reform Commission report does lay down in many ways a lot of these sort of issues, discusses a lot of these issues about recommendations and reporting mechanisms and so on and so forth. But there's no real particular best practice guideline of those sort of things, if you like. And certainly for public inquiries, the non-statutory one, they're all very individualistic. Some have consultations, some have forums, some roam around the country, some don't roam around the country, and so forth. So it's very much a individualistic, bespoke type arrangement.
Professor Dahlstrom, in the same area, is there a statement of precedent and best practice that the different commissions would adopt in Sweden?
Yes, there is. There is a handbook, 170-page long handbook given to all new inquiries from giving advice on how to set up the commission, how to report language issues, how to think with legal proposals, etc. So there is indeed.
Does this save time for the Commission? Because one of the issues we have here is about how long, frankly, in the setup period it takes as well.
I believe that it does. I believe so. But again, I haven't seen any systematic evidence looking into this, so it is a little bit speculative for me to say so. But I believe so, and I think that the government offices think so, and I think that is reasonable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one final question from me before we wind up, and that's to Professor Dahlstrom. I mean, in your submission, it says the government is under no formal obligation to implement the inquiry's recommendations. In practice, since policy advisory inquiries are an integrated part of the overall policy process, many inquiries have led to institutional or legislative change. But what about investigative inquiries? I mean, in terms of the Adoption Commission, you said that the government takes the Commission's presentation very seriously and will now carefully analyse the conclusions and proposals to make well-considered decisions moving forward. So is there a difference between policy and investigative inquiries in terms of how recommendations are implemented? Because it seems that policy proposals are much more likely to be, or is that just my reading of it, or are both of them effectively being implemented?
I think that you're. I think. Sorry about that. I think that you're right. But formally, there are no differences between the two. The government can do whatever it likes with both advices, both types of advices. But given the fact that the inquiry report will be public, it will be hard for the government to just ignore. For example, if you have if a public inquiry has pointed to malfunctions in adoption, for example, it will be very hard for them just to ignore it. They would need an answer somehow. But formally, there are no differences.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to ask our guests if they want to make any final points, if there's any issue they wish to emphasise or area they feel that we have not covered as yet. I'm just wondering, Dr. Prasser, if you would like to go first, if there's anything you feel you want to say to wind up.
I think in doing what you're doing is very interesting, but I think you've got to be careful not to be over-prescriptive about, because the virtue of these sort of bodies is they're ad hoc and can be appointed as you need them. And I think if you get over-prescriptive, you undermine. You don't want them to become like another part of a bureaucracy. You want them to be much more freewheeling than that. So it's going back to the situation. If there's too many inquiries, then that's really a political issue for the politicians to resolve, rather than trying to put some sort of break on it. I think in the New Zealand situation, the New Inquiries Act there says that the inquiry should not go more than 2 years unless it gets an extension from government. I think it's got something like that in. That's probably not a bad suggestion to think about. They put some sort of time limit on them, and that also means you put a time limit or on the expense account sort of thing. But the current Royal Commission into the COVID pandemic has been going, I think, now more than 2 years. So they've been given an extension to go further. Okay.
Okay, and lastly, Professor Dahlstrom, the last word is yours.
So, no, I don't think that I have any final thoughts other than thanking you for allowing me to give evidence here today. So thanks a lot.
Okay, well, I want to thank you both. I mean, the committee really appreciates your professionalism and expertise and the time that you've surrendered this morning to give evidence to us today. It's very much appreciated and will certainly be included in our report. So with that, I just want to thank you, and we'll take a 5-minute break to allow a changeover of witnesses and a natural break for members. Thank you both very much, gentlemen. on the cost effectiveness of Scottish public inquiries, I welcome to the meeting Wendy McGuinness, Chief Executive of the McGuinness Institute New Zealand. So I'm just wondering, Wendy, if you can tell us a wee bit about you. But first of all, good morning.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here, and what a fantastic topic. My background is actually I'm a chartered accountant and became a fellow chartered accountant, and then I moved into risk management, and then I moved into foresight and future studies. And inquiries for me are the sort of inquiry of last resort. That's our ability to deal with things that we can't have other mechanisms. So that is why my extreme interest and focus on the importance of getting inquiries working effectively. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Now, you say last resort, so what would you consider the last resort?
It's when the existing systems are usually hit by some sort of shock, whether it's like a disaster or a pandemic or so-called. So something that is unusual, that the system is not used to dealing with, and therefore an independent inquiry is required. So I can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like.
Yeah, I would, because I mean, I think that one of the broad concerns I think that we have is that the number of inquiries in Scotland and the UK have ratcheted up over the years, and so it becomes perhaps not a first resort, but no far off it in some cases. And there certainly seems to be it almost becomes a kind of go-to kind of place when something isn't working as perhaps it should. So I just wonder if you can talk us through how you feel we've kind of got to that situation, and how we can kind of counter that. Because I mean, I think no one here doesn't believe that public inquiries are necessary, but that doesn't mean that every public inquiry is necessary.
My view is that the world is changing at quite a significant pace, and there is a lag between democratic systems to deal with those shocks and the shocks that we will see. So my view is that we will probably see more of them. I see them almost as all, I'm a farming daughter, so an extreme number of different animals, and you cannot easily position them or design or describe them or manage them in the same way. So you need to be open to what comes before you that doesn't fit the usual system and frame, and develop inquiries. Now, some inquiries should be quite short, and some inquiries will be quite long. Some inquiries, as my previous two speakers said, is that the commissioners are there to hear and reflect, whereas others require a really short, quick answer, because society needs a quick, short answer to be able to deal with things. So New Zealand's had a very long inquiry, and I think that's not uncommon. But my view is that there should have been better mechanisms designed within the inquiry frame so that we could prepare the world for the next pandemic. And instead, it's slow and laggard and will cause issues. So I think that while every animal, if you like, in the field is different, there are certain commonalities that make some that should require fast speed, while others require long consideration and a very careful hearing of people, so that I think there was a lovely word that they used, retribution, reflection, that society knows that those views have been heard. So there's very different purposes.
I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that all inquiries are unique and there are different sets of circumstances. But do you think it would be helpful if there's a kind of consistency in approach from government, and that there were broad parameters that could be set whereby members of the public would know whether or not an inquiry was something that could and should be called for, or, for example, what they were looking for perhaps was out with the scope of a potential inquiry, and they should pursue other avenues for justice, for example?
Good question. Given my work previously on inquiries, it was a no-brainer that there was going to be a COVID inquiry. And one of the things that I tried to push very hard for was that an historian was employed very early, because one of the ways to reduce the cost of an inquiry is to have the data at hand. So I didn't have much luck, so I wrote a book on New Zealand's COVID nation dates. And that, I know, has been very useful to the commissioners and this advisory staff. But when an organisation is stressed, that data is often not collected. So one of the things is I would say that early engagement with an issue, when you know an inquiry is imminent, is the exact time when you should put your foot down on the accelerator and do the investment. I heard your earlier comments about police, for example. Police should have very good records, and if their record systems are not good enough, I mean, the reality is that they are in intelligence, really. So their data should be good, their systems should be effective, and if they're not, they should be very mindful when something is potentially has the ability to turn into an inquiry.
Yeah, I mean, as John Mason, pointed out, actually, and it was in the report we had from Professor Dahlstrom, is that, the Swedish COVID inquiry started in June 2020 and was, they produced their report within a matter of months. Is that the kind of early kind of approach that you feel when there's a problem building? Because sometimes what we find in this country is an issue, not always, sometimes things can come out the blue, and there can be disasters which happen. I mentioned Piper Alpha earlier, for example, but sometimes things build and build and build, and as you said, COVID, everyone knew it was going to happen, but not the pandemic, but the inquiry. Did you feel that was perhaps delayed too long in Scotland and the UK?
Definitely in New Zealand. There was a lot of calls for a COVID inquiry, but it became a political issue, and it continues to play out as a political issue. So what I've done is I've provided a paper for you, which will have hit your inboxes probably about half an hour ago. But because I really wanted to outline or make you aware of the issues that we've had in New Zealand with our COVID inquiry, because I think they're particularly relevant to yourselves, in that the agreement over the terms of reference for phase 1 was not agreed, and there was concerns around it being too narrow, which actually I agreed with. And so much so when the new government's come in, it has reassessed that. One of the political parties actually wanted to get rid of phase 1 completely. We call it phase 1, but at that time it was called the COVID inquiry. But the politicians decided to create a phase 2, which had slightly different purposes, and that has caused a lot of problems, so much so that you could kind of list them, but one of the ones is that the commissioners for phase 2 wanted to have public inquiry, public panel event with the Prime Minister, previous Prime Minister, and 3 of her ministers. But they got legal counsel so that they would not be attend in public, but they would do it in private. So I suspect that the COVID inquiry, and I've added all the information in there in a few articles and things, is a really great illustration of when an inquiry goes wrong and probably becomes unnecessarily expensive, and it comes back to what the purpose is, and not getting agreement on those terms of reference and that purpose in Parliament as against politics, a political party.
Now, one of the things, obviously, that we're looking at as a committee is to see how we can provide the kind of level of justice or restitution for victims in terms of, particular issues, but in a an area that's fair to the taxpayer and wider society as well, and in a more timious way. Now, in New Zealand, I understand that they're trying to ensure a 2-year time frame for royal commissions. Do you feel that's realistic, deliverable? Is it something which is likely to be breached in many cases? Or do you think that provides a kind of discipline that enables much more efficient and effective working?
I think any ability, so I agree with the Act, with the 2 years, but the ability to extend it is completely acceptable and in my mind, because it provides a review, it provides sort of a gate for people to go through to the next. So it gives an ability to review and assess. So it shouldn't be policed to the extent that you haven't done it in 2 years, but it should be that you should have very good reason. So one of my
Really, rather than a 2-year kind of
Yeah.
it has to be completed in, so it's a kind of best practice kind of thing. You aim for 2 years, but if it goes beyond that,
Exactly.
then that's the situation, but they have to give good reasons.
Yes, and one of the things that I've been advocating for is every Royal Commission should produce its own, think accountant, its own annual report on costs, risks and benefits, what's happened in the last 12 months, so that it meets that public accountability requirement.
I mean, we've heard from a number of witnesses that interim reports in terms of inquiries would be very helpful, and not least to ensure that people don't just wait to the end of an inquiry to implement any improvements. And some of the witnesses have said, you know, who've actually been the subject to these inquiries, other organisations have, that they are actually already working to try and improve things as they go along. I mean, in general, when you look at the New Zealand experience and their approach to public inquiries, and you look at Scotland's, the UK's, what advantages, if any, do you think the New Zealand system has that we could benefit from or learn from?
The Law Commission's report of 2008, and I've actually put the summary once again in this massive document you're going to get, just because I think it's terribly interesting to read Geoffrey Palmer, who was the Prime Minister and then also was President of the Law Commission at the time, I think writes a very good explanation of the importance of creating a simple framework. Now, he didn't want Royal Commissions to be one of those 3 types that we have in New Zealand, and arguably I don't think we have 3 types if I was to position it. So I've got a little diagram on the inside. Sorry, it's very scribbled, but you'll kind of get the picture. So we have the royal inquiries, the public inquiries and the government inquiries. In reality, every public inquiry has been considered a royal, we put the words royal inquiry on it, and I don't think we've got a situation where we've got a public inquiry that is not a royal inquiry. Because basically we like royal because it creates independence from government. And I would, you know, it may be a marketing facade, but it is a useful marketing facade, if you like. And that is to draw the distinction from government inquiries. So I did want to say that the 2008 the intention was that royal would not be there, and that royal would relate back to the 1908 until it died off, if you know what I mean. So definitely the intention was to keep it terribly simple in my reading, so that you would just have had public inquiries and government inquiries that were statutory inquiries. The second aspect is we've got this thing called non-statutory inquiries, which basically is where you don't have legal teeth. A minister can set it up, but they don't have the ability to seek or inquire information or witnesses. And with respect, because I have to follow that up, but it's very hard to follow up because it's non-statutory, it's not recorded well, so I don't know if we've actually had any of those recently, which is a really...
That to be particularly credible then, do they?
Well, yes. I mean, my view is that we really only have 2 types I know that I'm taking a step here away from the way the law is written, but in practice, I think we only have two forms of statutory inquiry, public and government. And then we have our statutory inquiries that are in organisations like the sorry, I'm just thinking the Auditor General and so forth. They have their inquiries interestingly are increasing. So one mechanism, for example, that you might like to think about is you could actually have public inquiries and government inquiries sitting over here, and you could up the ability of your statutory organisations to run their own inquiries. So that because what you want to do, if using analogy of a pot with a top on, you want to try and get as much of the steam out of the system. And using the statutory inquiries like the Auditor General is a great mechanism because it enables those guys to quickly see a problem, get into it, get it solved, come out with a report. We also have in New Zealand, their select committees can actually do inquiries as well, which weirdly is not apparent easily in the narrative. But so, for example, I've been trying to argue for some of the select committees to run their own inquiries. And one of the things I would have said with the COVID inquiry, they could have done some very early, quick reports on aspects of the COVID inquiry that could have been managed quite quickly and quite cheaply that would have actually helped with the longer, broader inquiry that took place.
Now, Professor Prasser, who spoke in the previous session, talked about a lawyer picnic in some of these inquiries, royal commissions, whereby it's almost like a dripping roast for the legal profession. And he talked about folk becoming millionaires for chairing these royal commissions. So I'm just wondering what the role of the legal profession is in inquiries in New Zealand.
We do often have them as a commissioner, or at least one of the commissioners. They normally are the chair. I don't think we have picnics. I put a table in just to compare the costs of the budget versus the total costs for the last 3 Royal Commissions. That's on page 3 of the document I gave you. At the moment, we're all within budget with all of them. And I actually think, from my experience, I've never seen that. They're very committed, diligent, responsible. They're really wanting to do the right thing. And but actually, you've made me realise it may be because of the DIA. So the Department of Internal Affairs is the central unit. So they manage, I'm going to say manage is the wrong word. They help administer the inquiries. So they may actually have a very strong ability to manage the budget and help manage those processes and probably have a word in a few people's ears if things are going off track.
Half an hour ago,
sorry.
we've obviously been taking evidence, so we've not had a chance to actually read that. But as well as a kind of recommendation for 2 years for inquiries, you talked about being in budget, so I take it therefore when inquiries are set up, there is a kind of budget allocated to that?
Yes, I think it forms part of the terms of reference, but I've also got the 2 COVID inquiries, terms of reference in this document, exactly for that reason, but you could check that, but I'm pretty sure it's actually mentioned in the budget. It's definitely within the broader correspondence.
Now, although you said that the cost, people kept within budget, you talked earlier on about how the 2-year time frame can be extended. Is that the same for budgets?
Yes.
But it's unlikely that doesn't happen very often?
I think it has happened with the phase 1, but I would need to check that. So I think the thing is it's acceptable to seek to expand budget timeframes and even change the terms of reference as we did in the move from the phase 1 to phase 2. There's just a process that needs to be followed to deliver that, and sort of a public acknowledgement that this is what's happening. So there's so for example in the COVID inquiry there's a website, all the updates, all the minutes are there, which I referred you to in some of the cases. So it's a very, as an accountant, I find them very well administered, and I know where I can find things and you know, what's happening. And I've obviously talked to them and so forth. So I feel very confident in our public inquiry processes.
Okay. In terms of the confidence, does that extend to implementation of recommendations? Because one of the issues we have is that often inquiries can last years. There are many people who, you know, feel that they have been the victims of an injustice. They look to an inquiry to deliver on their behalf. The government takes the recommendations and says they'll examine them, and then years pass and they just kind of fade away. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes recommendations are implemented. But I'm just wondering, in New Zealand, what's the kind of delivery mechanism for recommendations? Does the government feel almost compelled to implement recommendations, or does it kind of take a more Australian perspective, shall we say?
I'm not quite sure what the Australian perspective is, but
Well,
I'm
maybe
sure
I,
it's,
maybe no.
Yeah, I know. I think it's. I think it probably is. One of the things that does make me very angry is that it's not even acknowledged. So a raw report is written, the government accepts it. Like I'll give you an example. It may be given to the Governor-General for one moment and taken out of their hands and taken to government. So I think that we could make more of the passing to the Governor-General in that situation. And I think that we should make more of the fact that it has been acknowledged and read by government, and that the government should actually go to the extent of saying that we will read it, you know, the processes, you know, there is a lot, you know, it could be simple. So in other words, there needs to be a proper acknowledgement, just not a thanks, if you know what I mean. And then there should actually be a more detailed analysis of it that comes out to summarise, you know, what the government is going to do and what the government is not going to do.
Generally, do they implement recommendations in New Zealand, Timmy Slay, or is it very much a kind of mixed bag?
It's a mixed bag. I can tell you with the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Genetic Modification, we did an analysis of, I think, 47 or 49 recommendations, and I think a lot less than half were implemented within the shortish sort of time frame. So I think 5 years. But I could clarify that for you. But my experience is that we're not good at. Governments are not good. The New Zealand government generally is not good at looking after Royal Commissions of Inquiries and their recommendations. So much so that in this book here, which I've marked, we did a review of all the Royal Commissions in New Zealand to get soft copies for a website. And a very significant amount were not found anywhere. So we didn't have soft copies.
Witness that we took evidence from in terms of the work that we're undertaking in looking at public inquiries, said that his inquiry, which was looking into child abuse in the island of Jersey, went back subsequently, a year or two later, to look at the effectiveness of the recommendations being implemented and what had changed. Is there any follow-up in terms of what happens in New Zealand?
That would be a line with us. One of the things I would like the commissioners to be able to, or be called upon or sought to do a review 5 years hence of their recommendations. There's two reasons for that. One is I think the public have spent so much money and time and effort into getting the best brains on the job. Having an ability to get the reflections, say 5 years later, provides an ability to also get their last thoughts. I always think that's the last chapter of the book, the one that you've finished the book, published it, and then you've thought, you know, I really should have added this bit. Often that observation is the key one, and we lose the opportunity because of the way that they basically close the files, everything goes off to Archive New Zealand, and that's it. And I think it's a disappointing, poor investment in the process.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to open up the session to colleagues around the table. The first will be Liz, to be followed by John.
Good morning. Could I just ask you, in relation to the comment that you said that the world is changing in terms of how democracy operates, etc. Do you think that that change is one of the reasons behind some issues that are facing public inquiries?
Yes.
Could you just tell us what you think that is?
Okay, so the last 6 weeks I've been at the OECD two-day foresight. There's a expert foresight group that gets together. And then I've just spent 5 days at Oxford Scenario Development Programme. Now, it's really well acknowledged that change is obviously stays linear for a very long period of time, and then it jumps all over the place. And in many ways, we've had a relatively linear time since World War II. The level of change I think that we're going to see is quite significant, and we're actually in the middle of it at the moment. I actually added in my notes, my WAD, I actually added the government inquiry into Operation Burman, which was a military inquiry, and I thought it might play into understanding yourselves with the police. So this one is a government inquiry, and it's actually understanding. I think that we're going to have to see a lot more of those, unfortunately. If you're looking at trends, I would recommend the Ministry of Defence Defence Futures report on global trends, published in 2004. I think it's the best on the planet. It's not an easy read. It's a big solid thing, but yes, so sorry, I'm not answering your question. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, it's a very interesting dimension to it. Do you think, though, that this change in democracy, perhaps a much more unsettled world that we're living in today, do you think that's raising the frustration, perhaps in some cases anger, amongst public
Yes.
to try to press governments to deliver something that they're not delivering? Namely, there's a frustration that governments are feeling. Do you think that's...
Absolutely. I think there's a massive lag. Democracy has to catch up with this world, and that's why I think things are... I think I always saw it with inquiries, but I now really see that inquiries are terribly important, because the amount of bad actors that are going to influence democracy, governments, it's going to be quite overwhelming, and we need to create, I'm going to call it safe rooms, that we can have those kind of discussions to deal with those sort of issues that we may come.
When I was asking the two gentlemen from the first session, I was really wanting to know whether in Sweden and in Australia that there has been a growth in the investigative public inquiries as distinct from the policy ones, because that frustration is growing. And I think both answers probably not, but in Scotland we're definitely seeing that. Namely, there is a concern, and I think some of our witnesses have put this to us already, that there's a frustration out there that government or government agencies are not delivering the quality of public services, particularly when it comes to health and justice, education, etc.
Yes.
And that's raising the tempo.
Yes.
Yeah, is that the same in New Zealand?
I would absolutely say that. I think the thing is, for me, I wouldn't throw stones at democracy or the institutions. I would actually do the reverse strategy, which is build them up, make the institutions, and I would have a lot of them, because they're going to be targeted individually. Sorry, I'm not trying to be depressing, but so you want a whole lot of institutions that are doing inquiries that have very high levels, standards of processes, so that you're building a network of trust within the democratic system.
So just to pursue that, do you think that that trust might grow if there is one particular body within government, one committee, let's say, within a jurisdiction that looks after the administration of public inquiries, so that people feel that, you know,
Yes.
this is how it's going to be done, we approve of this? Do you think that might help, rather than what we tend to have here is a bit sort of all over the place, really?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between administration and I would call it strategic leadership of an inquiry. So I think the administration is the commonality, the common knowledge, the common processes. I think the decision making and the thinking and the discussion, the most important thing is that people go out and seek the right people to talk to. So at the Oxford course, which, with respect, there was a fantastic analogy. So this was doing scenarios, but same thing, the importance of the horizon that you're looking at, the importance of the scope and the purpose, which you've talked about. But there was a really great analogy that I thought, oh my gosh, that's just such a gem, I'm going to bring it to you, was the fact that he was trying to say so many people do scenarios and they think the purpose is about the heart attack, the thing. They think they believe really strongly that that is that where they should put the effort. But actually, if you don't think more broadly and seek out diverse views, you won't find out that it was actually because someone stubbed their toe and they've got blood poisoning.
Good reason for allowing for them to be independent, in the sense that they're they're away from government.
Yes.
Do you tend to agree with the Swedish perspective, whereby you want to have that independence, but at the same time you perhaps want to put a time limit on how long an inquiry could last?
Yes, I think year review look at, you know, these. I mean, I think the only just having a really quick look. The inquiry, we had an inquiry into historical abuse in state care, and that was about 5 years. Now, for obvious reasons, those voices needed to be heard, and using scenario language, you're looking for patterns, and you're looking for, triggers, wildcards, things so that you can understand what went wrong. So that required a long one, whereas the example of the attack on the Christchurch mosques, there was a massive need to try and be complete, but also to try and build capability and be seen as a country to acknowledge the terrible thing that had happened. So there was definitely pace in behind that. So in terms of investment and timeframes, you'd probably want to spend, I'm going to say, twice as much money and make it shorter versus the other one making it longer.
Question: do you believe that public inquiries generally should be judge-led, so that there is a good level of trust?
I think there's enormous advantages with having that analytical approach. I don't think lawyers have it all, but I think it's that ability to gather the information on the table before you make a decision. So I think as a general rule, they are taught to gather the data and the evidence and seek opinions, seek documents, get people on a witness stand, and dig deep and hard till you feel as though you can make sense of something. Otherwise, it would be a terrible thing to have commissioners that actually thought they knew the answer.
Thanks so much, very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan.
Thank you. Well, yes, that leads on to one of the things I was thinking about asking you, which is, is the disadvantage of judges that they are used to court cases which can go on and on forever. They don't seem, lawyers, in my opinion, I'm an accountant as well, I should say, lawyers, in my opinion, don't seem to operate within timescales. It'll just take as long as it takes. And, also that seems to lead, and we got the impression from Australia that with the Royal Commissions, it does become like a courtroom. And you've got lawyers supporting the victims, you've got lawyers supporting the police, you've got lawyers everywhere. Is that the downside of too many lawyers involved?
I think my simple answer is yes, but I think it can be managed. So I think that's probably what your questions have made me realise is perhaps how important the DIA centralised has actually been really useful for us, because I haven't felt that in our processes. There's been a couple of situations with the COVID inquiry where they've created minutes, and this is just interesting because I don't think it's ever happened in New Zealand before, whereas I will put a submission in for phase 1, but I'm not allowed to publish it, and they weren't allowed to publish it until their report came out. And the same thing has happened with phase 2 of the inquiry. Now, I personally disagree with that very strongly, but my understanding is that there were probably reasons behind that, and I, as a member of the public, have to trust that perhaps they were worried about vulnerability. You know, there has been a lot of tension in New Zealand, a lot of threats, so perhaps I'm taking that opinion that maybe that was why they've done it.
I mean, that raises the question of privacy against what's everything being in public. And I think Sweden, I had the impression from what we'd read that it was largely in private. I think that's actually not the case. They've got some stuff, they discuss certain things in private and have other evidence in public. But, you know, is there any argument for doing more of this maybe in private? And would people be more open in their evidence if it was more in private?
Yeah, interesting, because that's why I put that one of the defence one in, because they actually raise concerns about the lack of even them as commissioners getting the information that they wanted on time and in a complete manner. So in other words, the restrictions had really hampered their ability to deliver results.
And also thinking of who's kind of chairing or whatever, obviously you need a person as a chair, but we got the impression both in Australia and Sweden that they often have a panel or a group, or however they describe it, which would include maybe experts or different people who are interested. We seem to be very focused on having one person. And the problem with that is if the one person resigns, we're back to square one, or I don't know where we go, as is happening. Have you views on that as to, you know, should it be very focused on one person?
I'm going to just give you the pros and cons, which I'm sure you know. But I quite like one commissioner. I've noticed, I think in the UK, you have one commissioner and then you have an advisory panel or group. I'm not sure, you could probably tell me whether that's been successful or not, but I thought that, because definitely processes are slowed down when you have 3 or 4 people that you have to even get together for a meeting. So, and you have obviously the additional costs and all, you know, different advisors and whatever. So probably my view is that unless it comes down to the purpose and the expertise that's needed to deliver on the purpose. And my view is, I think with the COVID inquiry, they could have actually easily dealt by having a medical advisory team and without being a commissioner, if you see what I mean. Mm. So I think it's unique to each case, but I'm hearing you because we probably agree that the costs of having 3 or 4 commissioners, you know, why would you in this world?
Well, I mean, to answer your point about, you know, if we think the present system's working, no, we're doing this inquiry because we think the present system's not working, and we're certainly very keen to learn from other jurisdictions and so on and so forth. Yes, and just as a comment maybe on what you've just said, I mean, the problem, we've certainly had evidence that there's been 1 or 2 inquiries in Scotland where the chair lost the confidence of almost everyone. And then there's kind of no balance and there's no comeback, because if it's all based on this one person, and we're still to see, you probably know of this inquiry that's going on at the moment where the chair's just resigned, how that will be taken forward, because a lot seems to, well, it seems to me is to be based on the one, but I take your point, there's a cost if you had started having a bigger panel and so on.
The COVID inquiry might be interesting for you to look at, because we had 3 commissioners and we had the new government didn't didn't approve of the chair because he thought he was compromised already because he'd been involved as an advisor to the Prime Minister at the time. My understanding, I'm going to put that. So when they made a new panel for phase 2, new set of commissioners, they had the chair of the phase 2 sit in with a little bit of the phase 1 just to try and carry that institutional knowledge further, and they kept, my understanding, a lot of the similar staff that was involved in phase 1. But definitely my view is the COVID inquiry, phase 1, phase 2, was a disaster you could see happening really early on when it was very narrow. There was already political contention. It wasn't embedded. My thinking is that we need select committees we need a select committee where the terms of reference are agreed, and if they have a different view, that they people around the select committee table can actually and should write down their different view. So you might have a majority and minority on the terms of reference. So it's an official document. So that enables everyone going through the process to be aware of these different views. In terms of your comment around the institutional knowledge that is gained from the process of phase 1, there is hopefully the report, and the report was actually really comprehensive in this case, but it could maybe not have been, and we may have lost a lot of institutional knowledge that had been collected at significant public cost.
Yeah, well, I fear that's where we are at the moment as well. I mean, you mentioned, in answer to Liz Smith, you were talking about building trust and institutions. I mean, I think you're a little bit more optimistic than I am. I'm just not sure if it's possible, because we have social media nowadays, which, I mean, I know there was always newspapers in the past and there was different things undermining, but the amount of negative stuff, and, you know, even to the extent that COVID didn't exist and all of these things. So I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, do you really think it's possible to build up public trust, or do we just have to accept that trust is falling, even if standards stay the same? There will be more and more demand for inquiries and blame and vengeance and all of these things.
I think one of the things that we've never really had to deal with at such scale and pace before is the bad actors, whether they're nation states or whether they are mafia or so forth. The wealth that is being collected with bad actors is so significant that there will be interests at play that we just don't see or know. So my view is that we really, this is the time. What you're doing right now is the time to build these robust, resilient, trustworthy institutions, and you're putting the effort and time in to tell your people that we are working really hard to try and create these inquiries and these report mechanisms so that we can deliver you trusted reports and data and people and so forth. But it's going to be ugly.
Yes. Okay, we'll finish on that note. Thanks very much. Thanks, Convener.
As always, Johnny. I just want to follow up on a point that Liz made, talking about judge-led inquiries. I mean, one of the issues that was interesting that came out of the previous evidence session was that it said in Australia the judges are retired. Now, here in Scotland, they're not retired, generally speaking, and as a result, 10% of our judges are involved in public inquiries, which means that trials, etc., are being, delayed, or which obviously has an impact on the whole justice system, and indeed the justice for people who are involved in those trials, whose relatives, etc., may be victims, or they may be victims themselves. So I'm just wondering if you think that's an approach that we should maybe adopt here in terms of public inquiries. Should judges, assuming they're available, be retired, or should they be serving judges?
Given what you've just said, my opinion would be the serving judges should do their business, which is not inquiries. I think that justice is extremely important and you need to put all the resources into that. I don't think you need, I think you need good legal advice on processes. I don't think you need to be the person in the room running an inquiry. Does that make sense to you? So in other words...
It does make sense. I mean, I think there's pressure from organisations and lawyers representing the families of victims, etc., to have a judge-led inquiry because it's perceived as a gold standard. And we're now at a situation whereby if you don't have a judge, leading an inquiry, it seems to be a kind of, it's not, it almost becomes, it kind of devalues it even before it starts. That's the public perception. That doesn't necessarily mean, because we've heard from other witnesses how effective non-judge-led inquiries can actually be. But if the public aren't listening to that, and the people who feel that they've been wronged and it's on their behalf an inquiry's been held, don't accept that, it's very difficult, I think. But I think there is, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be a retired judge as opposed to a judge who's actually serving. I mean, that would hopefully stop some of the bottlenecks in the court system resulting from judge-led inquiries.
You can actually train people to chair processes. So, for example, I'll give you the example of the Institute of Directors in New Zealand. I'm sure you have some. You go through a training course, you get your qualification that you can, and that you're aware of all the laws that relate to directors. I don't think you need to have expertise across this area. You're just dealing with expertise across a very narrow. And there's also no reason why you can't have a judge as an acting advisory person that can be pulled in for example, like if you're doing a public inquiry, those aspects you're talking about, witnesses, those parts of the processes you can. I mean, that's where I would be going. I would be trying to find a mechanism to give the public trust that the people that you've chosen have been trained and have the expertise, and not only that, they have the support of so-and-so and so-and-so behind them.
We've only got 36 judges in Scotland, so if 3 or 4 of them are tied up in inquiries, it's 10% hit straight away, to the court process. Okay, any other comments from any colleagues? We don't have any other further questions from colleagues around the table, so I just want to give you the opportunity to, as you'll have heard in the previous session, if there's any points that you wish to make and areas that you think we haven't covered that you want to emphasise.
I might, if it was all right, just to quickly go through my 6 points on the cover page. I would be very quick.
Fine, I'm happy with that, yeah.
Okay, so to summarise, 2 types of statutory inquiries. I wouldn't do any more. The public inquiry terms of reference should be signed off by a select committee. So that enables when parties...
So we don't have select committees, so you're saying a parliamentary committee?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, Yep, sorry, thank you. And that ability for a minority interest to be put forward. That would have picked up our situation with Winston Peters, and it would have been embedded early in the process. He made those statements publicly. I don't know. I wasn't aware that there was a document otherwise. I really like how government inquiries have an appropriate minister in New Zealand. And so basically the distinction is that a public inquiry goes to your parliamentary committee, whereas the government inquiry goes to the minister and so forth. And I think keeping those operating separately are extremely important. I mentioned the annual report slightly, but I really think, I like that line, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Getting those regular mechanisms in place, and you may, for example, even want to go to 6 monthly reporting, so that you can get that ability for the public to be engaged in the process. It's just a line. Government should focus on setting the purpose and engaging the right commissioners, and largely leave the timeframe, scope, and processes to the commissioners themselves, using the heart and body analogy, and which you've talked about, and I think highly aware, the centralised support for inquiries, just how important having that administrative core working effectively.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And I want to thank you in particular for taking the time and the trouble to come all the way to Edinburgh to give evidence. It's very much appreciated by the committee. It's always best when people come here in person. Our final evidence session on this inquiry will take place on the 25th of November. We'll hear from the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Gaelic in person. We'll then publish a report setting out recommendations to the Scottish Government before the end of the year. So that concludes the public part of today's meeting. We now move into private session to consider 2 draft reports and our work programme. All right, Michael? So I'll just call a 5-minute break to enable the official report and broadcasting to leave. Okay, thank you very much.